Thursday, we'll end class going over probably like 10, 15 minutes, go over the review sheet that's on Canvas. So you guys have any questions on that, that'll be the best time to ask. And although obviously you can come talk to me later on today or tomorrow, anytime. What else I want to say? Oh, we're not going to go super in-depth on the exam with questions about elasticity because we're learning it today. So I'm not going to make you go home, learn something on your own while you're trying to study for the exam as well. So it'll be just a couple of very basic questions on it. So the exam will mostly focus on the earlier stuff, to be more fair. Section 6.4 I always skip. It's like other demand elasticities. It's a little more in depth than we really need to get into in this class. So it's not something I'm going to make you learn. Plus there's like a bunch of terms in there they throw out, and they'll have like 3 or 4 in like one paragraph to learn, so they don't go super in depth. So it'll be tough for you to learn on your own as well. And we'll just skip the example with the family farm completely. All right, so the question this chapter starts out with, do people respond to changes in the price of gasoline? So far, we've been working with supply and demand curves that slope at a 45-degree angle because that's the easiest to draw. It's simple, and that's all we've needed for what we've been trying to do. But sometimes people are going to be really sensitive to a change in price for good. Sometimes they're not going to care. So that's the concept of elasticity, is how much people's demand for a good changes based on how much the price changes. So people tend to not vary the amount of gasoline they buy even when the price changes. Gas prices just went up by like 40 cents over the past month or so. Haven't really changed how much I purchase from that, based on that price change. And then your textbook has an example of actual demand, so not just one person, what it was like for them in their life, but actually nationally in the United States, what happened. So in April 2014, the price of gas was $3.60 a gallon. So higher than it is now, at least. And then it fell by December 2014 to $2.50 a gallon. And consumption of gas only rose by about 7%. So people didn't really change how much gas they purchased. So people still do respond to incentives, like we talked about earlier. They're changing their behavior somewhat as prices change, incomes change, price of related good change, things like that. But sometimes for goods, they don't change by that much. Again, if you need to drive somewhere, you need to go to work, you commute to get to school, you need to drive home for holidays, the price of gas isn't going to really affect that, especially not in the short run, because you have to continue to do these things. You'll economize a little bit. You may do all your errands in one day, so you don't have to drive from home quite as often, so you don't waste as much gas. But in the short run, there's not a lot of other alternatives you can do. Not like you can take the subway to campus or even Uber around here. So we're going to start with the demand side of the market. We'll start looking at consumers, and that'll be what most of our focus is on. We'll talk a little bit about the price elasticity of supply at the end. So the idea of elasticity is some way to measure how much the quantity changes when the price changes. So as the price of a good increases, people are going to buy less of it, but how much less are they going to buy? That's the question we're trying to answer. If we can come up with a numerical number for this to compare, we can compare 2 different goods, see which is more sensitive to price, which is less sensitive to price. A very simple idea is look at the slope of the demand curve. There's our normal demand curve. Maybe there's another good that their demand curve is like that. So there's one idea. We can compare the slope of demand curves. But the problem with looking at demand curves, or just looking at the slope, is that the slope is dependent on what units you use to measure. So if the price here is listed in dollars, or millions of dollars, or thousands of dollars, we'll get a different slope depending on which one we choose. Likewise, the quantity. If we, sometimes our examples will say they'll have single-digit numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it'll be in like millions per week. If we look at millions per week versus like billions per year, we'll again end up with a different slope. And we don't want our comparisons to depend on like what units we're using. So when we measure elasticity, what we do is look at how much one economic variable responds and change to another variable. But we do that using percentages. So the percent change in price, the percent change in the quantity bought and sold. When we use percentages, it doesn't matter if the two goods have different units. Thousands of dollars versus millions of dollars versus just dollars. The percentage change will come out the same, so we can compare them between goods. Unfortunately, because we're not using regular slope, and because we're not using the numbers that come out there, we're looking at percentages, a little bit more math. So the simplest way to say the price elasticity of demand equals the percent change in the quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. This formula right there, to put it in, less words. The price elasticity of demand equals the percent change in the quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. Little delta here in math just means change. So now for demand, remember demand curves slope downwards. So as you increase the price, the quantity demanded decreases. And you decrease the price, the quantity demanded increases. So one of these numbers is going to be positive and one will be negative, no matter what we're doing. So our answer for price elasticity of demand, say, for example, there's a 10% increase in the quantity demanded, and there's a 20% decrease in price. Our answer, 10 divided by 20, 1/2, is going to be negative because that 20 right there is negative. So when we're comparing our answers, we're looking at our answer for price elasticity of demand, we're going to do what's called taking the absolute value. That's the distance a number is from 0 on the number line. So basically that means get rid of the negative. It's important to remember these do move in opposite directions, so we do have the negative here, but when we look at the final answer, we're going to take the absolute value. We're going to get rid of the negative sign. So if we had the price elasticity demand, say was the opposite, say there was a 20% change in price, or change in quantity demanded, due to a 10% change in price, that answer would be -2. Take the absolute value, those big vertical lines, the absolute value. We would say that this good was more elastic, the demand was more elastic than this good because the number is higher. If we were still working with negative numbers and it was looking at -2 and -1/2, -1/2 would be the larger number, but that's one of the reasons why we take the absolute value, because 2 is a more elastic good. So it makes it just easier for us to intuitively understand. So if we have a large value, in this case we have the 2, something that's greater than 1, that means the quantity demanded is going to change a lot when there's a price change. So if the price increases by 10%, the quantity demanded by consumers is going to fall by 20%. Basically, people are going to be really sensitive to price for this type of good. So if you're a firm, if you know that the good the demand for a good is elastic. You know, if you increase the price of a good, a lot of people are going to stop buying it. So you're going to be very hesitant to increase the prices. You know you're going to end up losing money on that. So for our definition, we say that the demand for a good is elastic if the price elasticity of demand is larger than 1. So 2, 3, 4, all the way up. You can have some like extremely high numbers even. As long as they're greater than 1, then we say demand is elastic. On the other hand, you can have goods that don't change. The demand doesn't change very much due to a change in price. We're going to call goods inelastic if the demand is going to be smaller than 1. So between 1 and 0. And then there's a special case we call unit elastic, where the price elasticity of demand is exactly equal to 1. That's going to be, pretty rare to hit the nail right on the head there, but it can't happen. And when the demand for a good is unit elastic, whatever, say there's a 10% increase in price, you end up with a 10% decrease in the quantity demanded. So it's exactly 1 for 1. Okay, so for elastic demand, we're responsive to a change in the price. If there's a large increase in price, people are going to buy a lot less. If there's a big decrease in the price, people are going to buy a lot more. So a small change in price leads to a large change in the quantity demanded. So for our example here, we have kitten mittens. Maybe people are really responsive to a change in price for kitten mittens. So if there's a 10% decrease in price, we move from $5 to $4.50. We end up increasing the quantity demanded from 100 to 120. So here we have a 10% decrease. Here we have a 20% increase. People are much more responsive to a change in price. And while the price elasticity of demand is not exactly the same as the slope, it's still a similar concept. So we can look and see this is a fairly shallow demand curve. So when the demand for good is elastic, you're going to have a shallow demand curve. On the other hand, there's inelastic demand. So here we're less responsive to a change in the price. So a large change in the price leads to a smaller change in the quantity demanded. So here we have tickets for a movie, Thunder Gun Express. Maybe Thunder Gun Express is an extremely good movie. People love seeing Dolph Lundgren act again. So people aren't going to change how much you purchase very often based on the change in the price. So we have a 10% increase in the price, moving from $10 to $11. You see the quantity demanded falls by 5%, going from 100 to 95. So this larger change in price and a smaller change in the quantity demanded. And again, the slope tends to look much more steep in this case. You don't use the slope to calculate the price elasticity of demand like we might want to, but they basically tell you the same thing. So you can judge if something's elastic or inelastic based on how much it slopes. And if I have something like this on the exam, I'm not going to mess with you and have the units look really weird or something. If I'm trying to draw an elastic demand for a question for you, you'll get a steep slope like that. Guys have any questions on the difference between elastic demand and inelastic demand? Okay. Now, you can use the slope to compare price elasticity of demand if the two curves intersect each other. So in this case, we have two demand curves, they cross here at point A. So we can judge them because they do cross each other on the same graph. So we know, remember the problem was you can have different answers based on if the units are different. because they're on the same graph here, because they intersect each other, we know the price is in the same units and the quantity is in the same units. So looking at these two curves, if you look at curve D1, this more shallow curve, when you cut the price from $3 to $2.70, you move along that curve from point A to point B. So the quantity is increasing from 1,000 to 1,200 gallons being purchased. So we say demand is elastic on curve D1 between point A and B because, again, the quantity demanded is changing more than the price change. We have a relatively small price change causing a larger change in the quantity demanded. I look at curve D2, this much steeper slope. We cut the price from $3 to $2.70. The number of gallons sold goes from 1,000 to 1,050 per day. So not a very big change. Again, with a steeper curve, not a big change. We say demand is inelastic. So if we're talking about gasoline at the beginning of this lecture, this curve D2, the steeper slope, is more realistic than what we'd see. Remember when the price dropped, I forget, by a bunch? I forget what the percentage change was, but it dropped by a lot. There was a very small change in the quantity demanded. So we'd expect it to have a steeper slope like we have in D2 there. Not a big change when there's change in price. Okay, I'm not gonna go through this entire example with you guys. Save some time so we can get through everything today and get to the review. Basic idea of what this is showing. Maybe they have an example in the textbook where if you go looking at from curve D1, going from A to B and B to A, if you calculate the percentage change, you end up with a different answer whether you're increasing or decreasing. So because of that, we can't just use the very simple percentage change formula. We have a slightly more complex one. Now, there's going to be one question where you have to use, we call it the midpoint formula, on the exam to calculate the price elasticity of demand. I will be giving you the formula on the exam, or I'll write it on the board or something. You'll have it. You don't have to memorize it ahead of time. So you're just plugging and chugging. So yeah, so it points out here, going from point A to B, quantity increases by 20%. But if we go from B to A, the quantity decreases by 16.7%. We don't want to use a formula where it matters which way you go from, whether you're increasing or decreasing, because you'll get different answers based off what we're doing. And we're trying to be as consistent as possible. So we use this midpoint formula. So our midpoint formula, price elasticity demand, again, a little more stuff going on here. The second quantity minus the first quantity divided by the average of the first and second quantity. And then the same, we're going to divide that by this whole side. So the new price divided by the original price divided by the average price. If I say, I don't know, what's the price elasticity of demand? If the percent change in the quantity demanded is 10%, percent change in price is 20%, you just use this. And I'll say, use this simple one. If it's numbers, like you have on this graph, then you need to use the midpoint formula. Okay, so let's walk through an example here. Write out the midpoint formula. Okay, so at our local gas station, we own like a small service shop in Loretto. The price, we cut it from $2.50 to $2.30 per gallon. Trying to lower the price, maybe get some more business in. As an example, gasoline sales went up from 2,000 gallons per day to 2,500 gallons per day. So basically, like we see on demand curve D1 here, from A to B. So what's the price elasticity of demand if this is what happens? So Q2 minus Q1, what is Q2? In this case, quantity demand increases from 2,000 to 2,500. So Q2 is 2,500. Minus the original quantity, 2,000. Divide that by the average. 2,500 plus 2,000 divided by 2. Now the price side. The original price, $2.50. Minus the new price, so $2.30. Divided by the average of the two. And from there, it's just solving these numbers. So I'm going to copy what the slides have so I don't do all the mental math. So right here, the average of these two is 2,250. And then the difference here is 500. Difference here is 20 cents. And the average is $2.40. One of these two is backwards. Which one did I put in for backwards? This one, okay. Yeah, because that should be negative. Yeah, because the original price is $2.50. V1 drops to $2.30. Good way to check your work and make sure you didn't make a mistake like that is that there's going to be one negative somewhere in this. If you're working with all positives or you're working with two negatives, there's something wrong. And from here, I don't feel like doing that math. We'll go to the next slide. I just kind of skipped ahead. Okay. It's going to be 0.222. And this side is going to be negative 0.83. 0.083. Now they multiplied by 100 to get you to a percentage. So you can do that, or you can leave it like this. Because either way, when you divide that, you're going to end up with negative 2.7. So now remember, we take the absolute value of that. So this one equal 2.7. So 2.7 is greater than 1. So we're going to say demand in this price range is elastic. For our smaller change in price, we ended up with a larger change in the quantity demanded. So consumers are responsive to price at this point. Okay, so now, let's look at the opposite. Let's look at curve D1. or sorry, D2. We looked at D1. I'm gonna put them up. There we go. So I want you guys to work on this real quick. So we're going to change the price. P1 equals $2.50. P2 equals $2.30. So we're dropping the price exactly the same. But now we're working with the second demand curve, P2. So our first quantity was 2,000. Now Q2 is only going to be 2,100. So using this formula, plug in these numbers and work it through and see what we get.
Bottom P2, P1, is that supposed to be a plus in the formula?
Yes. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, right. I think.
Did that fuck up everyone's answer?
There we go.
Even if it didn't, you have something to blame it on.
So it says like
Yeah, I'm gonna have this. I'll either write on the test or like up on the the board beforehand. Because yeah, 48 hours to memorize that is kind of a lot.
And we can just leave it as like the original decimal, or do you want us to turn it into a percentage?
Whatever makes more sense to you,
Okay.
whatever's easier. I just did that then rather than writing like times 100 up here and having that like carry through. But if you can like remember that yourself, toss it in there, feel free. I don't like to focus too much on math in this class because teaching math is hard, learning math can be hard, and there's a lot better things to learn economics than just doing problems like this. This is the only like real math stuff you'll have to do, and you'll have to do like some addition later. But like this is really it. But I think this is important enough concept to understand how elasticity works. And be able to compare something that's elastic and inelastic rather than just looking at curves. Sorry, you're gonna.
Yeah, so the answer always has to be put in the absolute value?
Yeah.
Okay.
For price elasticity demand because it's negative.
Okay.
Supply because it goes up, it's gonna be positive.
Okay.
All right, how are we doing on this? Is that the, oh, yeah, there's the other one. Okay. What's up? Oh yeah, of course. All right, so let's walk through this one real quick. All right, so our Q2, 2,100. Minus Q1, the 2,000. Divided by 2,100 plus 2,000 divided by 2, or our average of the two. And for the price side, P2 is 230 minus P1 is 250. Again, this side is going to be exactly the same as last time. So it makes it a little bit easier to work with. And 230 plus 250 divided by 2. Again, our average of the two prices. Sometimes with simple numbers like these, you can just do it in your head real simply. You don't even need a calculator. So here, the difference is 1,000 divided by the average of those two, 2,050. Now the difference in the price, negative 20. That's the average, $2.40. 0.049 is 1,000 divided by 2,050. Divide that by, this side is, oh, the same. Okay, that's. So divide 0.049 divided by 0.089, we end up with negative 0.6. Kind of sloppy there. Take the absolute value of that, you end up with 0.6. All right, you guys got? Does this make sense? And again, 0.6 is less than 1, so what does that mean? inelastic. This time we have a much less of a response to a change in price in terms of the quantity being demanded by consumers. And as I mentioned, even though slope and elasticity aren't the same, they're related. So if we're working with curves, well, all right. Yeah. So we have like these two curves here, working with the same units. Up here in terms of price and quantity, they're the same, they intersect each other. Then the slope basically tells us, or allows us to compare the elasticity between the two curves. So when they go through the same point, the one with the higher slope has the more negative elasticity, the higher elasticity, more elastic. Now there are a couple very weird examples that happen very rarely. So we have a completely vertical demand curve. That's called perfectly inelastic. That means that the price does not change at all, the quantity demanded does not change at all when the price changes. No matter how much you increase the price to, people are going to keep buying the same amount. You guys think of any examples of that? That's a good one. You think of something that's like a necessity, right? People's demand still does respond somewhat to price. You know, your dad makes you turn the light out when you leave the room. The price goes up a little bit. That's going to be extremely inelastic, but not quite perfectly inelastic. Yeah, EpiPens is a good example. Insulin, another example. Something that you need to survive. Basically, no matter what the price increases to, people are going to keep buying. Obviously, within reason. You make it $1 billion, people aren't going to buy because they don't physically have the money. Another example is something that's physically addictive. So, word on the street is Bryce here likes, partaking crack from time to time. I'm not going to judge, but some of his friends that are more frequent users, maybe they are physically addicted to it. So no matter how much you increase the price of crack, they're going to want to buy crack. Again, it's satisfying the physical addiction. This is basically the only two decent examples we have. It's something needed to survive, something you're addicted to. On the other hand, we can also have a horizontal demand curve. And again, this is very, very rare. Basically, the quantity demanded is infinitely responsive to price. So elasticity is it's infinity. So we call this horizontal curve perfectly elastic. So if there's any change in price, you increase the price at all, no one's going to buy it anymore. You're in a market like this, you really want to know if that's the case before you make the mistake of increasing your price. Again, not a lot of great examples. One is foreign currency exchange. If you're, you're going to Europe for the summer, you want to exchange U.S. dollars into euros. If they're offering you, slightly less than what the actual value is, say 1 U.S. dollars equal 1.5 euro, they try to give you 1.4 euro. So the price is higher that they're charging you because they're giving you less. You're not going to go to them. You'll go to someone else. Because in this case, you can think of the currency as like all the same good. No reason to spend more money for it or get less euro back for $1 if you know you can go somewhere else. Another example is like agriculture to wholesalers. So if you own a potato farm and you try to sell at a slightly higher price than the market price to, whatever grocery store chain you want to, they're going to tell you to go to hell, and they'll buy it from someone else at the market price. Now, these are very special types of market. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the class. But in these situations, if you try to raise the price, no one's going to buy from you. So we call that perfectly elastic. And the final one, again, is unit elastic, what I mentioned earlier, where basically when you have a decrease in the price, you get the same percentage increase in the quantity demanded. So it's like a one-for-one change. And again, that's just rare because it's so hard to hit that number like directly on the nose. Here I have a table just summarizing these, something that can, I don't know, help you study. So elastic, the price elasticity of demand is going to be greater than 1. If it's inelastic, it's going to be less than 1. So we have more of a shallow slope, and we have more of a steep slope here for inelastic demand. Unit elastic here is that 45-degree angle. So in this case, 11% decrease in price, 11% increase in the quantity demanded. So one-for-one, they perfectly offset each other. Here's our perfectly elastic, horizontal. If you try to increase the price at all, it's going to immediately go to 0. No one's buying from you because they can get it for that original price from someone else. And the last is perfectly inelastic. No matter what you change the price to, people are still going to buy it. So gasoline, going back to our example from the beginning, the demand for gasoline is inelastic. So it's not going to change much when the price of gasoline changes. But it's not going to be perfectly inelastic. You will cut down your travel a little bit. You may try to, group some errands you have to run together. You may try to carpool with a friend one day a week or something. So if we're talking EpiPens, we have this perfectly inelastic demand, but for gasoline, it is going to slope downward a little bit. We will have people, trying to save some money, trying to reduce traveling, at least a little bit when the price goes up. So for example, in the beginning when we had the price increasing, the supply curve shifting back to left, moving up along the demand curve, we end up the higher price and a slightly lower quantity demanded. If you tried to increase the price, say, demand for the supply curve shifting to the left, the market for EpiPens, you would end up with the same quantity being demanded because you have that vertical demand curve. Again, that's a very rare case. A lot of times, even things that we think of as necessities, people are still going to try to save some money. They're going to have inelastic demand, but not perfectly inelastic, because they will try to, reduce their consumption on the margin when the price increases. Okay, so why do some goods have such a high price elasticity demand, and some have such a low price elasticity of demand? There's a few characteristics that we can look at that are going to help determine what the price elasticity of demand is, just how responsive consumers are going to be. So the first is availability of close substitutes. You can kind of get that from the example of the perfectly elastic demand. So if there's a lot of substitutes available for a good, you have a lot of other options to meet that need. You're going to have a good with more elastic demand. So since there's few substitutes for gasoline, in the short run, you really don't have a lot of choices. The price elasticity of demand is going to be low. If you live in Altoona and you commute up to St. Francis, basically your choice is driving. You can't Uber up, no metro, maybe like Wolf of Wall Street and just take a helicopter everywhere. You can't switch to an electric car, at least in the short term. Over the long term, there are other options. You can move up here to reduce your gas consumption. You can switch to like a Tesla, reduce your gas consumption, or at least buy a more fuel efficient car. But in the short run, there's going to be very few substitutes. So you're basically stuck using gas. So if the price changes, you're not going to change how much you buy all that much. On the other hand, if you're looking for a new pair of sneakers, and Nike increases their prices, there's a lot of substitutes. There's a lot of other options you have. There's a bunch of other brands that sell sneakers. Maybe you're not wearing them to work out. Maybe you're just wearing them around. So you can get, a pair of boat shoes or something, or like canvas sneakers. maybe those are substitutes. So if you have a lot more substitutes, you're going to be more sensitive to price. That price change, even if it's just 5% for Nikes, is going to be enough maybe for you to switch to one of these other brands if you don't really care about the brands of your sneakers. There's a bunch of athletes in here, so I'm sure you guys really do care about what brand you're wearing, right? All right, like, that does make a difference. So that might not be the best example. The next, like I alluded to, is the passage of time. So over the long term, people can adjust their buying habits a lot more easily. In the short run, they can be very difficult, especially if it's like an expensive purchase. So if you're like the gasoline example, you can buy an electric car, but they're really expensive. That's not something you just go and do one day. And I have to plan for that ahead of time. So in the long run, the demand for goods are going to be much more elastic than in the short run. So yeah, in the long term, gasoline prices go up, people can move closer to work, they can find a more fuel efficient car, they can find another way to get to work. But if you're driving to work one morning and the gas price is increased, you're stuck driving home that day. Not a lot you can do then. But the longer you have, the more options you have, the more substitutes you have in the long run. The next is whether a good is a luxury or a necessity. So people are going to be a lot more flexible with luxuries, obviously. Necessities, something you need, whether it's gas to get to work every day, whether it's like milk and bread. For some reason, every time there's a snowstorm, people buy out all the milk and bread, like they're making milk bread sandwiches. I still don't get it. But people see those as a necessity. So if the price changes for those goods, people are still going to be likely to buy them. They're not going to be very responsive to price. It's something they feel that they need. Whereas a luxury, you can put it off for a while. If the price goes up, you're like, I'll just wait for it to go back down. Because it's not something you need, not something you use all the time, you're going to be a lot more sensitive to a change in price. And because luxuries, I think the best example is like things like entertainment and vacations. If a flight to Hawaii increases, you can get a flight to Florida instead. So you're going to be a lot more sensitive to price. The next is the definition of the market. So the more narrowly you define the market, the more substitutes are going to be available. So the more elastic demand is going to be, the more sensitive you're going to be to price because there'll be more substitutes. So let's say you really like to wear jeans. There's not really good substitutes. You don't want to be a nerd and wear khakis. Okay, so your demand for jeans is going to be pretty inelastic. There's not a lot of good substitutes for you, so you're not going to be looking elsewhere if the price of jeans increases across all brands. But if you define the market more narrowly for a specific brand, you will be more sensitive to the price of that brand. So if there's like Levi's and Wranglers, the price of Levi's goes up by a lot, you can buy Wranglers. You can switch to that different brand. So you have more substitutes available than if you're looking at all jeans as the market. Next, we have the share of goods in a consumer's budget. So if goods really cheap, it's a small portion of your budget, you're not really going to care about its price. So if you buy salt like once a year, you guys probably don't because you can just get it for free and Torbian. But you buy salt once a year, it's going to be a small portion of your budget no matter what. You're not even going to know probably if the price increased from one year to the next. You're not going to care because it's such a small portion. But if you're looking to buy a new car, a small change in price is going to be a big part of your budget. So you're really going to care about that. Hopefully this makes some intuitive sense, these things, because we're all consumers. So we can just think of how we act in our own lives. But the biggest thing, you look at these things like definition of the market, passage of time, availability of close substitutes, it's all about substitutes. Do you have other choices? Odds are if you have other choices, then you're going to be more sensitive to price. If you have fewer choices, you'll be less sensitive to price. We'll skip some of these real world things. This isn't going to be on the exam. You won't have like a big problem with this, but I do want to hit it really quick because, again, you guys aren't going to be economists. You'll be going into like normal businesses, working normally instead of being some egghead studying this stuff. So a practical application of this. If you're running a business or you're working, it's like your job to like price a product. You have to think, if you're going to change your price, how many customers are going to gain if I lower the price? What will happen to my revenue if I lower the price? If you know the price elasticity of demand for your product, or if you have a general idea if it's elastic or inelastic, then you can help answer these questions. You can understand, will my revenue go up if I cut the price, or will it go down? So suppose the demand for your product is going to be relatively inelastic. Customers aren't really sensitive to a change in price. You can increase the price by a decent amount, people are still going to buy a lot. You decrease the price, people aren't going to buy too much more. When you decrease that price, you're going to gain a few additional customers, but you're not going to gain a ton of customers. And they're not sensitive to prices. Price change doesn't do much for them. So those few additional customers you're picking up aren't going to compensate for the lost revenue you're making per unit. So the decrease in price is going to swamp the increase in the number of people that are buying. On the other hand, if your goods has a higher price elasticity of demand, consumers are going to be a lot more sensitive to the price of your product. So once you start decreasing that price, you can gain a lot more customers. And all these additional customers are going to outweigh the less revenue you're getting per unit because you're getting so many more people. Yeah, so here we have illustration of that. Here's the price here. Before the price cut at $3, drops down to $2.70. We lower the price by 30 cents. We end up losing, in this case, $300. But that rectangle represents how much you lose from lowering the price. This rectangle here represents the gain you get from the new consumers that are now purchasing, from the increased quantity you're selling. You look at that just by eyeballing, and we can tell that the loss right here of the lower price you're getting for each unit is going to be greater than what you're gaining from the additional units being sold. So when demand is inelastic, remember we've got this steep slope, not a big change in the quantity demanded from a change in price, so demand is inelastic. You end up losing money, you end up losing revenue from trying to lower the price. So if you're a business with relatively inelastic demand, you don't want to lower your prices. You're not going to end up, in most cases, making more money. You'll end up losing money. On the other hand, if you have a more elastic demand curve, in this case, we have the same price drop of $3, $2.70, but we're now increasing the quantity demanded from 1,000 to 1,200. So quantity demand is going up by a lot more in this example. This gain here from all the new units you're selling, in this case, is going to be greater than the loss from selling at a lower price per unit. So because you have all these new people that are now buying your product, or people are increasing how much they're buying your product, you end up making more money from lowering your price. So if you have elastic demand, as a business owner, you can make yourself better off by lowering the price instead of raising the price. And if we did the opposite in this situation, we raised the price when there's elastic demand, we'd end up losing money. So even though it can be, ahead of time, it's not like you have these numbers ahead of time for you to be able to say, oh, is demand, what's the price elasticity demand? Is it 0.6, the 1.6, 4.6, whatever? You're not going to know those numbers, but you can at least have a feel for whether demand is going to be elastic or inelastic. just by looking at things like the number of substitutes, those variables we just talked about. And here's another graphical representation. Basically, what it's saying is at some point, you maximize your revenue from lowering your price or increasing your price. There's some point that's going to make you, bring in the most revenues possible to your firm. Okay, real quickly, we'll talk about price elasticity of supply. It's the same basic idea. It's the responsiveness of the quantity supplied to a change in price. You're going to divide the percent change in the quantity supplied of a product by the percentage change in the product's price. So instead of these quantities being demanded, they're supply. I'm not going to have you do any problems with the price elasticity of supply, even though it's the same basic thing. I think one's enough. The basic determinant of the price elasticity of supply, or how steep the slope of that supply curve is basically, not exactly, is the ability and the willingness of firms to change how much they're producing once price increases or decreases. So for some firms, it's pretty easy to change how much they're supplying, how much they're producing. Maybe they're a factory operating at 2 shifts. They can start operating a 3rd shift or have everyone work like an hour of overtime. Sometimes it's really difficult for businesses to do that. The pizza shop in town probably has 1 or 2 pizza ovens. So once they have both those ovens full of pizza, they just have to go and buy a new oven to make more pizza. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to increase their supply. So if the price of grapes doubled overnight, farmers can't do much to increase how many grapes they're producing immediately. That's going to take a whole planting season to be able to do that. So in the short run, price elasticity supply, very inelastic. There's little they can do to change. But in the long run, there's a lot they could do to change. They can plant more fields, over several years. So it'll be more elastic. So one of the reasons why we see such volatile price swings in the price of oil or gas for your car is that demand changes very frequently, but it takes a very long time to produce more gas. You have to go out and basically find new oil fields. It takes a lot of work to figure out if the oil's down there, how to get it out, to actually drill and pull it out, then refine it. It's a very long process. So supply doesn't change very much. It's a fairly steep slope, so we're going to end up with very big price swings based off changes in demand. Okay, so we'll end there. There's a few minutes left in class. I'll bring up the study guide. If you guys have any questions, want to go over any of these problems from the study? How's that? That easier to read?
What chapter is it exactly?
So it's going to be the 2 introduction sections that don't really have chapters in the book. There's some stuff from chapter 1 and 2 in there, but I don't think the textbook does a good job of setting everything up. Then it's going to be 3, and then this chapter is 6.
Test me multiple choice or
Oh yeah, so you'll have 25 multiple choice questions and 5 short answer questions, and then 1 or 2 extra credit questions. Extra credit will be kind of related to stuff we did in class, kind of not. And I don't know, an easy way to pick up points and think about something we talked about.
The one question was the difference between positive and normative economics, and which should we focus on? Which one should we focus on?
In this class, we should focus more on positive economics. So positive economics is describing what's happening, the mechanism that a change in one thing affects a change in another. And normative is making a decision whether it's good or bad. So for normative, we have our own value judgments in it. For positive, it's just describing what is happening. So we want to describe what's happening in here. There will be some times where we can have normative discussions of whether something's good or not, but for the most part, positive. These questions are a lot more broad than what is going to be on the exam. I'm not going to give you like specifically what the multiple choice question is going to be, but if you can answer these questions, you'll be more than able to answer any question on the exam. Oh yeah, for the Allen effect, remember that was like the main thing I want you to take away from that is that opportunity costs are important. That was when you added like $1 to like expensive cigarettes and cheap cigarettes. It changed the opportunity cost between the two. So more people bought expensive cigarettes. Because even though they're both are pricier, you think they'd shift to cheap cigarettes, they bought more expensive cigarettes because you had to give up fewer cheap cigarettes to get the expensive cigarettes. So the idea of opportunity cost being so important.
The subjective value, the difference between that and the labor theory value.
Yes. So the idea of subjective value is every individual has different wants and different needs. So we're going to value goods and services differently. It might be the opposite of what you'd expect from an economist. You know, say like hard and fast, like no, this is the value. We're not dealing with this subjective BS. But really, because we all have different wants and different needs, we're going to value things differently. So the labor theory of value is the idea that goods and services have intrinsic value. Basically, the cost of production is what it should be worth. Anything below that, and the buyer is taking advantage of the seller. Anything above that, the seller is taking advantage of the buyer. Because of subjective value, we can have gains from trade. So I can give up 10 bucks for a pizza. I make myself better off because I get a pizza that I wanted. And the other party's better off because they get 10 bucks, which they wanted more than the pizza. Remember profit and loss. Profit serves as encouragement. People, they say, hey, like you're meeting consumer needs really well. Keep doing this. So it's a signal to them that this is working and an incentive for them to keep doing it. And an incentive for their competitors to start doing that. And loss is a signal, hey, consumers are not getting value from this. You need to combine these resources in a different way. And because of the hard budget constraint, firms go out of business if they keep failing to meet consumer needs. So it's this feedback mechanism. So even if entrepreneurs make mistakes, which they often do, or regular businesses often make mistakes, loss encourages them to try something else, and the profit also encourages them to try something else and signals what some of the other good ideas are. I told you you're not going to have to memorize these. You're not going to get this question on the exam. It'll ask you something about like, I don't know, the demand curve. This calls a shift in the demand curve. Which variable does it fall under? So it's more of like an application than you just writing them all out. But if you can write them all out for this example, then like for this review question, you'll be able to handle that question no problem on the exam. Yeah. Remember the difference between an increase in supply and increase in the quantity supplied? Increase in supply is you're shifting that supply curve out. You're moving the entire curve. An increase in the quantity supplied is you're moving along that supply curve. And moving from point A to point B on this supply curve is a change in the quantity supplied. Shifting the curve entirely is a change in supply, or an increase in supply. We got 2 minutes left. so you have a basic question about the concept of price elasticity of demand. So how responsive consumers are to a change in price. Yeah, when is it inelastic? When is it elastic? So whether it's greater or less than 1. There will be a question about perfectly elastic or perfectly inelastic demand. Off the top of my head, I don't remember which one. But again, a very simple question about it. You're not going to be writing like a 10-page essay on it. Actions. Yeah, definitely be able to draw a supply and demand curve and explain what that shift means. So if they say consumer tastes and preferences change so that they like Arby's roast beef more, what's going to happen to the market for Arby's sandwiches? In that case, consumers' taste change so much so that they like it more. That's going to increase the demand curve, shift it out to the right. So D1 to D2. Our equilibrium points are right here. Our new curve is going to be here, new demand curve. So the quantity demanded, quantity bought and sold on the market is going to increase, and the price is going to increase because of this change in demand. And be able to just draw this. Yeah, so we covered what substitution income effect, no one here, good. I will be giving you the midpoint formula for you to do one of those problems with price elasticity of demand. Yeah, and here's an example problem for you to use it on. This last one here. All right, so it's 9:10. You guys can get going. If you do have any other questions you want to ask me now, feel free to. If not, there's the rest of the day and tomorrow.
Can we bring a calculator?
Not like a scientific calculator, but like a, or not graphing calculator.
Not a graphic.
Yeah, because you can like write shit down. Well, fuck it. If that's all you have, you show it to me ahead of time. But make sure you're not like writing shit in there, and then you can use that. Yes, you will have a calculator for all that.
I don't know either, honestly. I'm not smart on the night station with calculator. Oh, I'm taking 2 math classes here. I got a D.
I did that math all through high school. Write shit in there.
I just wrote it on my desk.
Rookie mistake is you would like people would like write it in like the background thing.
Yeah.
Like the obvious place. No, you go into the you hit the y equals thing, type in all the formulas.
Yeah.
Yes, and you write it in there because they never check that. I'm busy from 11 to 12, but I'm free the rest of the day. Yeah, you're welcome.
Wait, so we can use a graphic calculator if we show it to you?
Yeah, you have to show it to me first.
All right.
Okay. That's easy enough. All right, I'm gonna ask you what kind of calculator I have when I see you. Okay. I don't use that shit. I don't think. Oh, what time are you free tomorrow?
I'm busy from 11 to 12.
That's it?
That's it. So anytime besides that, if you want to come by and talk or talk over here.
What time do you, I don't have class till 12. So what time do you, is best for you?
I really anytime. I don't know if you want to do it in the morning, if you want to do it like after your
I
class.
don't care, cause I'm done at 2, but I'm free basically all morning or all afternoon outside of 12 to 2.
If you want to do it in the morning, like late morning, that might be better.
Okay, cause I just wanna go over the, curves with you a little bit, cause it's not a problem, I just wanna make sure I got it right.
Yeah, especially for like the first exam, you want to know that you've
Yeah.
got this stuff locked in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
shot. How was the weekend?
It was good. Maybe one of these weekends I'll have like a relaxing one instead, but
A what?
a relaxing
Wednesday?
a relaxing weekend instead.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sure that would be good. Like, I don't know, I always struggle with what I'm supposed to do between the 15 minutes this physical class. Like,
It's the worst. Not enough time to go anywhere, but like too much time to just like sit there like at the desk.
right. And like review for class, like who does that? You know?
Yeah.
I guess I'll fire up this for the first time today.